Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kanban. By the end of this lesson, I hope that you will be able to describe how Kanban works. All right, so a little bit of overview. Kanban often gets lumped in with Agile frameworks, and like not for no reason, but it actually predates it by quite a bit. So we think of like the major families of Agile as being Scrum and XP. Kanban is like a pretty handy third one in here. It actually comes from the Toyota production system though.
Didn't Kanban come first? Like,
Oh, by a lot. By
yeah,
like,
okay.
by like 40 years.
Right, okay.
So yeah, if I'm gonna put time or like years on these. So the Agile Manifesto is 2001. Scrum is probably like 1999. It was a little bit later. XP was earlier. It's probably like 95 or so. Kanban, though, if I was just to swag a year, it'd probably be something like 1975.
Yeah.
So this is part of, and like the idea of applying Kanban to software, relatively new. That came even after this. That was probably 2003. It was largely based off of David Anderson's book, which 2003, maybe 2010. There you go. So that kind of like renewed interest in the idea for software, and it is super compatible with agile philosophy, and in a lot of ways is a really helpful counterbalance to Scrum and XP. But it's really part of the Toyota production system, um, which has a very rich history behind it that I'd highly recommend looking into if you're like a process dork. But ideas like lean came out of this. Um, just in time was also part of the Toyota production system. Whole bunch of other things, but that's kind of the origin story of Kanban. So Kanban is very different than Scrum or XP in a couple of ways. It has no time box. So by time box with Scrum, we're talking like we want to work in cycles that we call sprints. 4 weeks at the longest, usually about 2 weeks at the shortest. But we have this kind of like self-similar repeating thing that we do some increment of time. And XP, so we'll say that's 2 to 4 weeks. XP is like almost always 1 week. And they're called iterations, not sprints. Otherwise, same shit. Kanban has no time box at all. The Those of you who were in the Scrum lesson, Scrum is like prescriptive about workflow, like how you organize the work. You have to have a stand up every morning. You have to start a sprint with a sprint planning meeting. You do a demo at the end of your sprint to your customer. You do a retro. So all of that stuff, like there are rules around. Have to have a scrum master, a product owner. Everybody else is a team member. There's no other roles. All that stuff is like big part of Scrum. XP doesn't have as it has suggestions around those things. It'd be hard to say that they have rules around what roles you're allowed to recognize on a team, or what ceremonies you have to keep. But it's very prescriptive prescriptive about the work. You don't write code that doesn't have a failing test already. You don't write code by yourself. You always write code with a pair. Safety first. So you're always deploying into an environment that has continuous integration and continuous deployment. So a lot of the technical stuff, they're very prescriptive about in XP. And you can totally combine these two things together. In fact, there's a saying that like Scrum is the box that XP comes in. Kanban is prescriptive about almost nothing. So weird. So what is Kanban good for? So I got asked this the other day in the Rand's Leadership channel. And let me see. Rand's. And this was my answer. Kanban is good for unscrewing a broken system or for work that's fundamentally more about throughput or output than output. So if you think of output as like putting out features, that's like an output-based thing. Throughput would be like, we have these customer support tickets that we have to get through. That doesn't happen in neat little 1 week increments, but it still is a flow that needs to be managed. So Kanban turns out to be pretty good for both of those things. So let's see, I'm going to have you guys do a little bit of reading before we keep talking. So let's see, we got good stuff in here. We got some good stuff in here. Let's take just a couple minutes and read through the wiki article. Cool. I'm going to call it 4 minutes. Go. Another minute. Another minute. Okay, cool. So I'm going to amend this. It's not prescriptive about nothing. It's really prescriptive about how the work is visualized. You can have any process you want. You can have any kind of work, any kind of team. You can use Kanban as long as you visualize it in a particular way. So before we go any further, let's stop there. Hit me with some questions.
Could you go back to the diagram of the board that you had before?
Mhm.
Theoretically, in this case, would the 3 stories that are in the user story development ready done, shouldn't those be moved into the feature acceptance one? Because it'll make it to the total of 8.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep. Totally.
thank you.
Now, like, one of the reasons they maybe didn't here is the work item types. That's like kind of advanced Kanban, but so these stories are parts of epics. And so part of the policy for this might be that you don't accept stories, you accept epics. And so until all of the things in that epic are done. So for example, this one has part of Epic 602 and 2 parts of Epic 602 done, but 2 parts of Epic 602 in progress and 2 parts of Epic 602 are over here. And so maybe you have to wait until all of those are ready until you do feature acceptance for the entire Epic.
That makes 100% sense. Thank you.
Anything else? Questions about any of the stuff you read or saw?
So, okay, I've got a question. So I've never considered Kanban from a development perspective before. And so one of the ways that I always thought about it is managing the difference between the cost of storage and then the cost of supply time.
Yes.
So that just that sort of mindset is now kind of, well, I'm excited to think about it, right? But how does that transfer over into development as opposed to like, I've only ever thought about it as physical manufacturing, right? Like you need these parts to come in,
right?
But you can't hold these giant parts in your factory, in your car factory.
Yes. All right. So I want to answer that question. It's like you're spot on, like you're right there. But first, let's like just take a look at a really simple board. Simplest Kanban board you could have is a 3-column to do, doing, done. So like if you've done Trello or all kinds of like task management systems, you've probably seen something like this before. So we're visualizing the work. The thing that makes it Kanban is a WIP limit. So we say that this has a WIP of 2. WIP is work in progress. You're only allowed to have 2 things in progress at any given time. And then you have all kinds of tickets. In Kanban language, they're called work items. So we have all these over here. And then we've got 2 things in progress. Okay, so one of the things that we have in progress moves over to done. Now we're under our work in progress limit. So the next work item comes in. It pulls from the right side to the left side. So we don't, like the opposite of this, it's like, oh, that sounds totally rational. Until like way that you've probably tried to do something like this before is you start a little bit of everything all the time and you're always working on all of them. And then once they're all done, we just kind of like sort of push them over here. Kanban is about being very restrictive about that idea and minimizing the number of things you're working on at the same time. There's some like formulas for like estimating WIP, but a good one that a lot of teams use is the number of people on the team plus 1. So if you got a 4-person team, the WIP limit for pulling something into to do should be 5. But really, it's something that you experiment with. You're trying to keep it as low as possible. And there's a lot of philosophy and research and science and shit around why you do that. In economics, it's queuing theory. And management, it's theory of constraints. It's also like a big part of manufacturing, kind of like Jack's talking about. But you will have more throughput in the system if you limit how many things are in the system at once. So the slowest way to get things done would be to work on everything at the same time. Because you end up doing a ton of context switching. There's also other costs, like Jack mentioned, like if these work items are parts, you might not physically have enough space to keep all of them. So we try to constrain that as much as possible and make the flow through the system as even as possible.
So could we think of the work items as units of work? So like maybe it's a feature or a module, or it's something that we need to make that we've been able to structuralize.
Correct.
Okay.
That's it. Most of the time when you're doing this in software development, they're features, user stories, something kind of like that. But we don't have spoilage. We don't have like space storage issues. So I want everybody to think themselves for a second. Why do we care? Why not just have everything in progress the whole time? If we're not concerned about space and we're not concerned about spoilage, who gives a shit if we have everything on the to-do list kind of in progress all the time? I want you to think about that to yourself for a second. It's a good question. What other risks do we have? I'm going to put you in groups to talk about this because this is like kind of the key to the whole thing. Maybe a little bit more time to think about it. And I'm going to put you in groups. Scared somebody off. Fuck that. All right. Why might we want to limit WIP? Opening up the breakout rooms. Let's call this 3 groups. Oh man, fuck. It said it was going to do it for me. And then it totally did not do that. All right, throwing you in rooms. All right, go for it.
Boy.
All right, so tell me some takeaways. Why might we want to limit lip? Limit lip, come on, man. Why might we want to limit whip?
So what Sam and I talked about was the fact that like being distracted, having too many things on your mind is expensive.
Yeah.
And then also Sam made a really good point that the more things you have to do, it increases the opportunity for something to fall through the cracks, or the appropriate amount of attention not have to be paid to it. And then as we were talking, we also thought about the idea that the more things that there are to do, the more likely that you have that people are going to work on. There's always going to be preferred projects. And if you don't put the hard stuff up, then you're always going to have people who gravitate towards doing what they would prefer to do, or maybe what's easier. And I put that in quotes.
And if I may add on to that, one of the byproduct of the increasing of opportunity to fall through the cracks is that when you have a large group and something does fall through the cracks, there's generally a lack of accountability and a lot of finger pointing, and that's no good.
Yeah, I like that.
That's not good.
Give me some more ideas. Lots of reasons we want to limit whip.
So Augie actually had a really good analogy to building a house.
Mhm.
You know, you don't build a house out of order. You don't start with the roof and then work on the foundation. So that part of that is in sort of the hierarchy of like, they're more important than others, but also like if things are going to be like connecting to other things, they have to be built so they can interact, so that they can be continuous.
Okay. Other ideas?
Just efficiency and all the work you have to do.
Well, why is limiting the whip more efficient than letting her rip?
You can focus on singular items rather than being spread out across many unfinished projects.
Yeah, it's kind of like that distraction is expensive thing, focusing.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah. Other ideas?
It also encourages a feature to get done completely instead
I
of just getting
love
everything.
that.
Yeah, instead of getting everything to it's okay and it works with everything else. Okay, point.
Anything that encourages done is a winner. How many things you worked on where we're 80% done? You stay 80% done for the next year.
Then the only thing I think of was for managers, it makes sort of that accountability thing easier. And I didn't really think of it like in terms of holding them accountable. I was thinking like as a manager, like I need to get things done or I'm held accountable.
Mm-hmm. Other ideas about why we limit whip?
Greater efficiency in assigning resources to a given task.
How so?
Well, you have X number of people working on X number of tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And if you limit the WIP, then you have a clear picture of who you can assign where or to what.
Yeah. It's like a lot easier to manage that way. And also, I don't know if this is specifically what you were getting at, but like if you have somebody who's super good at one thing, you can use them on that one thing more. If everything's working on the same time, then you have to have more people who do those things. It's true.
For sure.
Any other ideas about why to limit whip?
Help you identify bottlenecks.
Yeah. How does it do that?
By having less work in progress, so you can see where things are waiting rather than if there's a bunch in progress.
Ding, 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 ding. Love it. So in all the Agile frameworks, but especially in Kanban, we don't want to hide or ignore process inefficiencies. We actually want to like shine a spotlight on them. There's a saying in the Agile world that like, if something hurts, do it more. So like, for example, if deploying on Friday is scary because the deploy might break and everybody might have to work all weekend, cool. Sounds like you should deploy on Friday every Friday until that's not a problem anymore. So you make those things like the focus so that everybody on the team can work on making those not so scary anymore. Because like the fact that they're scary is the problem, not the fact that you're deploying on Friday or whatever. Any other ones? There's one more that I'm looking for. It has to do with spoilage.
I mean,
so
oh no, after you go.
only two things I can think of. So one is sort of from the developer end of we can only have so many things in our head at a time. And then the other one is like, so here's this incredibly good idea, this incredibly good feature, but next week someone else is going to produce it and they're going to have first mover advantage. So at that point, like, so what, we're copying them now. We're not the innovators.
Yes. So how about that, as the longer something stays in process, the higher the risk. The higher the risk, the work becomes irrelevant. That's spoilage. Compatibility for an operating system that nobody uses anymore. Cool, innovative feature that actually ends up being not so cool and innovative by the time it comes out.
Well, hang on. But if that's the case, if it's a cool, innovative feature that turns out not to be that cool whenever it comes out, then wouldn't that be something that we don't want to have on our ticket?
No, as in a competitor comes out with it first.
Got it. Okay, for sure. Okay. That's what. So where I was coming from that is the idea that like first mover isn't always necessarily the best mover.
Mhm.
Sometimes you want to see how it plays out before you implement it yourself.
Oh, totally. But like those are strategic choices. Do you want those to be strategic choices, or do they want them to just happen because you can't work very fast?
Right. It's not operations management. That's a right. Okay. Cool. Perfect.
Cool. So all of these are totally valid reasons why we might want to limit whip in progress. This is a big one. This is a really big one. Because like if Kanban is primarily about visualizing our workflow, but it doesn't tell us how the work should be organized or how we do the work or anything like that. Really, we want to just model whatever we're already doing right now. And a big part of this is helping figure out what those bottlenecks are so that we can work on those. And then both of these are huge. What I would kind of rephrase those as is context switching. Context switching is expensive. It's expensive for people, it's expensive for teams. There's a non-zero cost to like, if I have 3 things, when I'm working on one of them and I have to switch to another one, that has overhead. If I don't switch on anything until I'm done with it, I don't have that overhead. There's another way to think about this. If I have 3 things that take up some arbitrary amount of time, so this is 1, 2, and 3. And I'm working on all 3 of them at the same time. I don't think there's any case to be made that working on all 3 of them at the same time gets any one of them done faster. There's no like, assuming there's no advantage of doing these concurrently, then if I do a little bit here, then 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 a little bit here, I'm not actually getting anything done faster. And in fact, every single one of those context switches has overhead to it. Uh-oh. And so by increasing our work in progress, we're increasing the amount of context switching. We're actually slowing things down. It's part of queuing theory. And in fact, that overhead is so expensive that it's often preferable to, actually almost always preferable, to have idle resources. So in, oh my God, my kids just started crying. In lean terms, we call that slack, meaning that if everybody working at maximum efficiency is this, we want to hang out more like here. Any guesses why we don't want to maximize our resource utilization?
It sets an unrealistic precedent for the rest of your stuff.
Yep. So like unrealistic precedent. Any other reasons?
Might run out of resources.
Yeah. Gonna run out. What else?
You're not very responsive.
Can't
Can't
respond.
if something is just a little bit off, like you
Yeah.
can't make up for it.
That is, and that's really kind of the killer. So if we're at maximum resource utilization and we hit a bump, okay, well, there's nothing else we can do. And the people will try to make, especially in knowledge work, they'll try, well, we'll just work more hours. We'll work tonight. We'll work this weekend. But the thing is, you don't actually get more work out that way. This starts bending back over on itself and you start getting tired people. Tired people do shitty work. Nobody needs more shitty work. That just creates more problems that you have to fix down the road. And this starts spiraling on itself. Meanwhile, if we're never at capacity, we've always got some slack. Bump hits, we absorb the bump. Not a problem. Another bump, not so bad a bump. So we have all of that headroom. It's the same reason you don't drive your car 130 miles an hour all the time, even if you could. Headroom. We got to be able to burst a little bit.
Could you
Basi-
could you rephrase that into a like a I'm making a note.
Sure.
And my note begins with idle resources or slack is greater than.
Maximizing resource utilization.
Got it.
So like there's a whole dopey school of management that's all about how do I maximize resource utilization? Make sure everybody is doing something all the time. This is the opposite of that.
Well, I mean, that's part of the reason why our economy crashed so hard this year is because we weren't able to work at these like crazy high standards all of a sudden anymore. And so then everything collapsed because we didn't have any slack in the system.
That's a big part of it.
I'm
Yeah.
not trying to get into that argument.
Sure.
I'm not trying to, yeah.
But yeah, we want to, rather than maximizing resource utilization, we want to maximize sustainability. In fact, that's one of the core principles of Agile.
So you're basically leaving yourself some room for error.
And room to change direction and take advantage of cool opportunities you might not have otherwise. So this one, it's a core Agile principle. Promote sustainable development. You should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. That's how you do that. Maximizing resource utilization is not doing that. Cool. So when you're doing Kanban on something, and this works whether or not you're doing it for like your personal life or chores or a giant project or a small project or anything, it really doesn't matter. Model out the steps that you would go through. What are the different like phases a single work item goes through? That's your board. Now, an important note on this, I actually got a fight with somebody about this recently, and I still think I'm right about this. These can't cycle. for Kanban to work, you have to move in one direction. So an example of something that often cycles is you might have like a to-do, and then you might have, so that's like your backlog. Maybe you've got a feature prep kind of thing, and then something that's waiting to be assigned, and then like something that's dev'd, and then QA'd. Okay, well, what about when something fails QA? What happens? Well, then you cycle back to dev. All right, but we don't cycle in Kanban. So you have like a dev 2 and a QA 2. However many is like your worst case scenario on something you can kick back. Model all those columns. Because something can move forward really quickly through the process. It just can't loop. And then like it might get reviewed or something like that, and then whatever, done. So you want to flatten out whatever you're doing, and this is where you're looking for bottlenecks. The fight I got in was that like somebody referred to like this dev2 QA2 thing as shame columns. And like, it's not about shaming people. It's about visualizing what you are doing right now. It's not shameful that you're talking about this. It's shameful that you have a process where something can be done except not really done, and then done again, and then it's actually not really done. That's the part that's embarrassing, not the fact that you're talking about it. So this gives us an idea how often do things end up getting QA'd and sent back over and over and over again. And once we do that, and once we have WIP limits on this, if we have WIP limit of 1 in these columns, and we have something in here, nothing else can move on until these columns clear out. So that makes the team stop. We can't just ignore that while we're getting a bunch of other work done. We have to go, all right, stuff is stuck in here. How did that happen, and how can I help? And how can I help that not happen again in the future? Now you're shining a spotlight on a process inefficiency. So the inevitable result of like laying out a process like this is you go, all right, well, how can we prevent this from happening again in the future? It's like, all right, what if instead of having dev and QA be 2 different processes, what if they're the same process? What if whatever the QA person is doing, what if that person is sitting next to the developer and they're working together the entire time? And now we don't need that column, and we don't need that column, and we don't need that column, and we don't need that column. That's how you get the team to have that conversation to figure that out. Also, that's pair programming. That's where that comes from.
So if I can sort of, so what one concept I sort of have in my head is like long-term mercy. Like sometimes you need to upfront be a little bit harsh to like get people to get things changed because it's more beneficial in the long term. Is this sort of similar in that like upfront, like all of this work comes to a halt until these things get addressed? So like in the short term, it's kind of rough, but long term, that's what we're looking for.
A little bit. It's not letting anybody ignore problems. So it's like, it's not supposed to be demotivating or shaming. That only happens if you get in trouble because things are cycling through there. So-and-so's a shitty developer, or so-and-so is like such a dick in the QA department. That's not even a bug, man. They're just trying to like fill their quota. But it's like, it's systems like that that add the like pressure and shame behind this. If the team was just legitimately curious, why do we keep thinking things are done and then they're not actually done? Like, if we assume good intentions, this person wasn't trying to trick the QA person or slip through bad work or anything like that. They probably just didn't know, or there was some system that was working against them, or they were missing information, or there was a conversation that they didn't have, or any number of other things. And so if you approach that with curiosity, this isn't a shame column. This is, wow, we can figure out a way to work together better, I'll bet.
So could you think about that in like, so by mapping it out, you think the group thinks to themselves, it seems like we keep circling back.
Yeah,
What if we didn't circle
Yeah.
back so much?
exactly. And like,
Um,
whip limit of 1 on these, it could be 5 or something. And so there's only one thing in there. You could zoom something past it if you wanted to. But yeah, like, yeah, that's exactly it.
I wanted to ask also, how do you feel about swim lane diagrams?
So like swim lanes are allowed in Kanban. They have some danger to them. So like what a swim lane would be is if there's like a lane on here. Generally on teams that like use swim lanes in Kanban, there's only one swim or like there's only one reason why you'd have 2 swim lanes. And that's like a rush or a priority or something. So you have this thing, and then the CEO shows up and goes, I need this thing ASAP, or you have some game breaking bug or whatever. You don't throw out the system just because you got somebody said something was important. You can make a separate swim lane that like every column has a whip limit of 1, and that's allowed to like leapfrog anything else that's in progress. That's the only good reason IMO to use swim lanes in Kanban. Because what like a lot of people will do is they'll say, oh, well, we have one for dev and we have one for design and we have one for like all these different tasks on the team, but you're not looking at how the team works together. Like a lot of times they don't share whip limits and you're still thinking them as like independent things rather than one team trying to move work items across the board.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. The way that so I've always been a big fan of them, but like just hearing this now, so we would departmentalize things. So it would be like, marketing, management, operations, and then like more specific than that. But
Yes.
the thing is then what you do is you end up looping that QA2, Dev2 back into it. And what I'm seeing is the problem with that is you're normalizing circling back. You're just like, no, we circle back. Yeah,
Yes.
we even if nothing has changed, look over it again. Spend a week, spend a couple days, go over the thing that even maybe didn't change at all, but like you're gonna review it again because now it's touched these other points.
Yes. And that like highlights another really important part of this. These aren't people. They're like, you're not handing it from this person to this person to this person to this person. This might be a team of 3 people. The responsibility of these 3 people is to get work items across the board. If something is getting stuck somewhere, like if we're log jamming over here, the thing that happens on most teams is that this person goes, well, I'm just a business analyst, so I'm just going to keep preparing stories, man. And so they just push more work into the queue. They work so fast, man. They can just prep stories like nobody's business. Meanwhile, all of those reasons that you all told me why we don't want work in progress, that's still a thing. Just because your business analyst can shit out a whole bunch of like specs really fast doesn't mean that we're not adding context switching issues, that we're not like rapidly increasing the risk because we have stories that might go stale. And the worst thing is that that's not where the problem is. The problem is over here. And so this person can help out over here. And let's say it's this, I'm a business analyst and that's dev work. Okay, well, like the problem is that it keeps getting kicked back by QA. Can you do any QA stuff? Well, I mean, a little, I can just sort of like test stuff a little bit. Awesome. Well, that's the thing that's limiting the system right now. So instead of cranking out more specs, even though you're really super duper good at them, the system will be more efficient if you do this thing that you're really not very good at all, but a little bit more work is better than nothing. And this is another example of where blurred roles come in really handy on Agile teams. If you're not a business analyst or a QA person or a dev or a designer, if you're just a team member, then it's not a big deal for you to go to whatever column needs help right now. And in fact, like that visibility around the whole process, this is part of the reason we visualize it like on a physical board and everybody looks at it all the time, is now you don't go, I don't know if the product's any good or not. All I know is I prepped my specs pretty good. If you can see where your work fits into the larger process, now you can start getting creative about where it might be done more effectively or efficiently or earlier or later or whatever in the process. And that's what we want. At its simplest, to do, doing, done. Constrain the whip, you are doing Kanban. You have a more complicated process, model out the process exactly as you actually do it. Start putting some whip limits on there. Start lowering the whip limits. See where the system starts getting stuck. That's your problem. That's where you need to start making things more efficient. And you can do that bit by bit by bit by bit. Works on super non-agile stuff, works on very effective agile things. You can imagine how this is good for customer support tickets and like lots of other things. But ultimately, it's just this. We pull stuff from the left to the right rather than pushing things from the left to the right. Questions about Kanban?
Not so much about Kanban, because that's making more sense to me. You mentioned sort of the agile, like blurred role thing,
Yeah.
which sounds like revolutionary. That sounds to me like the difference between Dungeons and Dragon classes and Skyrim organic growth.
Yes. So that's a very apt analogy. So I don't just like out
That was
in,
hilarious.
yes.
Oh, that was hilarious.
Out in the wide world, I generally don't refer to myself as a developer. I call myself an agile product engineer. I worked in sales for a while. I worked in marketing for a while. I'm like, all right, at design, I have some DevOps chops. I'm not equally good at everything that I do, but if we think of this as marketing, analysis, design, dev, including like front end and back end and databases and whatever the fuck else. And management and infrastructure and sales. So like all of these have some role to play in like engineering a product. I'm not equally good at all of these things. Like I'm very strong here and I'm very strong here. I'm pretty weak here, but I'm not nothing. I'm like okay and getting better here. I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at this. I used to be better at this, but like I got something to offer in all of these areas. So if the thing that's most important right now is like, we got to get out there and talk to customers and figure out what the fuck we should be making in the first place. That doesn't have to be somebody else's job. I've bought a couple $100 of Amazon gift cards and gone to a college campus and hey, who wants $5 to give me your opinion on whatever the fuck? If that's a more productive use of my time for the product than me making a database schema, whatever, do it. And like, I'm here on design right now. I used to be here. And then I did a lot of work with a lot of designers and read some books and tried to get better. And over the years, that's gone up a little bit. Infrastructure also used to be a hard zero for me. And like recently, I started getting a little bit better at it. if you stop thinking of yourself as a front-end engineer and more as like, I help in various places in this life cycle. I was a 0 on all of them one day. I'll never be a 10 on all of them, but I can be better at all of them than I am right now. That's what unlocks the agility. That's how you can get people jumping between different parts of this and moving work items through the system. Optimizing for the system, not your personal performance review.
And then to develop, to make that something people want to lean into, you have to have very specific managerial behavior.
Oh,
Yep.
yes, you do.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons it's such an important job. It's not something you do because that person's really good at development. I'm going to reward them by giving this completely unrelated job that they may or may not be any good at. Yeah, your management structure needs to see you this way also, I think, for you to be effective in it. And like one last minor rant on that. Let's say the larger organization will never understand that. That doesn't mean that your team, if you have a solid manager who gets this, can't shit umbrella the whole gang. I don't have a brown. Piss umbrella. Splatters off. Keeps the team dry. And so in the management world, this is referred to as a bubble of excellence. Where do you think the term love bubble comes from? All right, any other questions about Kanban? All right, so our objective here was to be able to describe Kanban. So I'd like everybody to take, let's say 3 minutes and Slack me your best description of Kanban. Go. Take another minute. All right, excellent. Alex, would you read your answer? I really liked it.
Yeah, sure. I said Kanban is a system of workflow used to limit items that are currently in the work in progress stage. If you restrict the amount of items that are in the WIP stage, you add a host of benefits that include less distractions and context switching, pull more items into the done phase in a more timely manner. You can delegate your resources more effectively and maintain a sustainable production workflow.
Oh, beautiful. I'm loving it. All right, that's Kanban. Thank you so much. And I'll see y'all at stand down. Cheers.
Thank you.